Hi, I'm James Verdier, and welcome to the American Institute of Biological Sciences BioScience Talks, which is a forum for integrating the life sciences. On the second Wednesday of each month, we discuss the latest bioscience publications. And as a reminder, if you'd like to read more, point your browser to academic.oup.com/bioscience. And before we get into today's episode, I'd like to make a quick pitch for our Writing for Impact and Influence online professional development course, which I'll be teaching starting on the 6th of June. The basic idea behind the course is that modern technology has given us innumerable outlets for written content, whether those are press releases, social media campaigns, book reviews, memoranda, and so on. And scientists who are able to fill those outlets with good writing will have the biggest positive impact on policy, public opinion, and on their own careers. So please do sign up. We did this last year and it was a lot of fun. The sessions are conducted live with a lot of participation, but you can also listen in after the fact because we will record them. The link for it is io.aibs.org/writing, but you can also find that in the show notes. Moving on to today's show, I'm joined by Dr. Jiangxiao Qiu, who is an assistant professor of landscape ecology with the University of Florida, where he studies ecosystem service sustainability in the face of a changing climate. He joined me to talk about evidence-based causal chains linking human health, development, and conservation. I'll let him describe that in more detail, but the name of the game here is understanding the human role in ecosystems and applying that knowledge across numerous fields and in policy and decision-making. So let's get straight to it. Dr. Qiu, thank you very much for joining me today.
Also, thank you for inviting me onto this session.
Before we get too far into the article and that content itself, I was hoping you could tell us just a little bit about the changing face of conservation science from a philosophical point of view. I think we have a historical view in which conservation was seen as sort of the competing interests of humans against nature, and they were seen as separate. Could you tell us a little bit about that and sort of how that's changed over the years?
Sounds good. Yeah. So kind of over the past few decades, there has been a paradigm shift in the conservation biology. So as people know, kind of some of the history of the conservation biology, that's kind of started with the protecting of the endangered species. Yeah. So it kind of historically, like this seems to be this conflict between species conservation, also some of the human development, and which these two objectives seems to be kind of conflicting with each other. And also as time goes and the people starting to realize that so just these two kind of divergent perspectives are not actually sufficient to achieve a lot of conservation goals. So there has been the evolving theme towards kind of protecting from kind of, or the shift from protecting the nature for itself to the nature despite people. So especially with the concept of ecosystem services and sustainability, and people starting to realize that these two objectives doesn't to be exclusive from each other. It's more like ideally we can achieve the objectives of conserving species, but also can achieve some of the other sustainable development goals for people.
Okay, so we're kind of moving away from a system in which we, are trying to preserve something that's not been affected by humans, at least as we perceive, and moving more to a system in which, humans and nature are viewed as part of an interlinked system.
Yes, so that's especially true like in the age that we are in, which is so-called the Anthropocene, which is kind of basically every ecosystems, or most of the ecosystems are dominated by human and also are shaped by human. So there's really it's almost impossible in some cases to actually to tease apart the human influences. So human is actually part of the equation of kind of conserving nature and also for achieving sustainability.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. It would be sort of foolish to look at, even the most pristine ecosystem as unaffected by humanity as you could find would still be heavily affected because of things like, the changing climate.
Yeah.
So that philosophical change has been taking place over time. And I'm sure it has some implications for how we might manage ecosystems, does it?
I totally agree. Yeah. So kind of in the past, maybe some of the kind of ecosystem management is kind of the focus is the species of interest for conservation or for the intrinsic values. But kind of the shift from there to the more like the ecosystem kind of management from more holistic perspective, like maintain the functioning of ecosystems and also the services or the goods and services provided by ecosystems. Yeah. So. Also, like there's also kind of for the biodiversity of species and also ecosystem function and service. These two things, even within the same ecosystem or landscape, they're not or it's hard to be separated because some of the surveys are actually directly derived from biodiversity, or some of the ecosystem functional services are actually underpinned by the species. Yeah, so kind of this kind of shift is actually try to, or to some extent, it can be more effectively to achieve like the management objectives for both species as well as for ecosystems.
So this could be a situation in which you were expecting, say, an ecosystem service in the form of agricultural output, but that ecosystem service would then be also affected, by the local biodiversity and the health of the ecosystem in which the farm, existed, and that sort of thing as well. So it's inescapable that these many things are connected.
Yes, yeah. So I think kind of the example you draw, like for the agricultural landscape, so that's a really nice case. Like people manage the land for producing food, but also the service is being provided by species such as pollination or pest control. Like those are basically the benefits that are directly from the different species or the collection of the diversity of different species. So they can produce synergies or produce the benefits that can enhance the food production.
And you can only achieve those things through management if you're paying attention to everything at the same time, which is kind of what your article gets into, and you're describing a methodology for looking at all of those different factors at once, or at least in considering them at least iteratively as you're making management decisions and policy decisions. So could you describe, just kind of give us a basic idea of what is this research framework like? What is an evidence-based causal chain, and how is it used?
Yeah. So this kind of like the causal chain or the evidence-based causal chain is not something new. It's been like in the field for a long time. So it actually being used in different areas for many years. And kind of the reason why we started doing this work is that we realized that a lot of the kind of the ecosystem management, or a lot of the kind of the contemporary environmental or social environmental problems we are facing right now are basically intertwined across different fields or different sectorial boundaries. Like for example, like conservation, economic development, and public health. Like those, some of the problems we're facing right now are basically kind of cutting across these different fields. And kind of the nice thing about the causal chain is really simple. It's basically a description of the logical consequences from the action, or from management, or from the intervention through this kind of social ecological gradient. So basically, you can imagine that like the management or the interventions, they can lead to the social changes, but also they can lead to the ecological changes, which then cascade to the social systems. And the kind of unique contribution of this paper, we are of kind of the proposed use of the causal chains, we basically try to find some of the common grounds that are of the causal chain being used in different fields. So these common grounds originated from the theories underlying the causal chain, which is the logical consequences of the action. And then what we are trying to set up this framework or the approach is that they basically can bring together, or they formulate the foundation that can bring together the knowledge from different areas. So kind of by using this kind of basically trying to construct this causal pathways, then we can understand what are the kind of direct or the indirect consequences of particular management.
Okay, and so I'm wondering, what are some of those different sectors that haven't historically, at all times necessarily, interacted and shared information? Kind of who are the groups at play here?
Yeah. So for example, like for the environmental sector, like kind of people use the result chain, which is a very common kind of methodology for the conservation planning. And for the public health, for example, they use direct cyclic graphs. So that's kind of a approach that you can testing the clinical outcomes of a procedure or treatment by accounting for other confounding factors. So kind of in these different fields, like another example is that in the development or economics, like the input-output model, basically what you can get from what kind of input or the resources that has been put in this production chain. So they were not being called like causal chains in different sectors. They were called by different names. But if you go to the bottom, to look at the basics of these different approach, like it's essentially like the causal chains or the theory of change that's underlying these different. So kind of the way they have been used in different areas.
So it's a situation in which you've got this concept that's sort of similar across different sectoral boundaries, but everyone's using a slightly different language to describe the same thing.
Yes, totally. Yeah.
And then I guess the idea here is that by introducing this common language of the evidence-based causal chains, you can get these groups to talk to each other, more effectively, as they're coming up with management decisions or reporting on findings, et cetera.
Mm-hmm, yeah. So the other thing I did not mention, or it's still some of the ongoing work, is the first part, which is the evidence-based component. So a lot of some of the ways like the causal chain have been used in the past is basically people construct this hypothetical or the causal pathway that are based on the expert knowledge. So they're not systematically verified by synthesizing the evidence from different areas. So based on this kind of causal pathway or the causal chain, then we can starting to find out what kind of evidence that can support each causal pathway. So in this way, we can actually bring together like the kind of the knowledge or some of the evidence from different areas together into the same coherent framework.
Okay, and now I'm going to put you on the spot just a little bit, and I'm hoping that we can maybe walk through an example, and I'll let you pick it. But kind of what's an area, what's a field, what's a management question that might be addressed through this framework, and kind of let's talk our way through the way that an evidence-based causal chain approach might be applied to it. So I'll let you choose, and then let's talk through it.
Yeah. So I will just go with the example like we use actually. So in this paper, it's actually kind of the example we've gone through several iterations. So it's basically kind of the forest, kind of the management situation in the forest is how people manage like wildfires, and in places where there's a dominant fire regime, and the mechanical thinning has been used as a way to basically reduce the fuel structure or the fuel load in the forest ecosystems. So kind of this mechanical thinning, they can affect the different aspects, like ecologically, but also socially. So for like one example of the direct social consequences is that this kind of forest management, they can basically lead to, or they can create a lot of like forest management jobs. So that's fairly straightforward. But for a lot of the ecological changes, like the kind of this mechanical thinning in the forest, they can reduce the frequency of the fire, or they can reduce the frequency of the canopy fire, which if the fire happened, that can lead to some of the health problems, like the air pollution, or some of the kind of the respiratory disease, or so that's a direct consequence of the burning of the forest. And also kind of the thinning component, or the thinning as a management tool, they can affect the forest canopy or the appearance of the forest, which can then affect some of the recreational value or the aesthetics kind of benefits of the forest ecosystems, which can be related with some of the incomes of the jobs of the different beneficiary who enjoy the benefits from the forest. So that's kind of like one example of kind of where this ecological change, they can have the social consequences. The other some of the other kind of ecosystem functions related with management, like for example like carbon or the fresh water or soil erosion, like those are also kind of cases where the management can change these different functions, which then will affect will cascade to the benefits to different beneficiary groups.
Okay, so just to sort of to recap, mechanical thinning in this case would be you're hiring people to go in and cut down some percentage of the trees as a means of stopping wildfire.
Yeah, kind of, to reduce the density of the trees.
And so, if you actually wanted to decide whether this was a good idea, you need to look at everything. You've got to look at the economics of the fact that you're able to hire people and produce some local income, for foresters who are cutting down the trees. But at the same time, you also need to look at the fact that this could have an effect on the recreational value of the wilderness, and it would also have an effect on the health outcomes of the people who live, downwind and are going to be exposed to potentially less fire. So it's all of these things kind of coming together.
Yeah, kind of the kind of different components, kind of they can be affected by this single management actions. But if you just look at it from just a kind of one section of the perspective, like some of the pieces, like they might be missed. Like for example, like people may focus, or some of or some of the conservation on the species might be the focus for this management, or some of the other the interest groups might be more interested in the kind of what's the health consequences.
Okay, so previously they, in forestry, they largely have been, just for our example, they have been looking at, multiple outcomes, but this is a means by which we might, for instance, be able to integrate a more holistic approach that, brings in things like public health in ways that perhaps haven't been in the past.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I'm wondering now about, sort of where this idea for this approach came from. It was born out of a conference in 2016?
Yeah, so kind of, so this was a project funded by the Lewis Foundation to the Nature Conservancy. So the Nature Conservancy, they realized a lot of the conservation problems are not actually kind of conservation problem per se. It's more like the integrated or intertwined problems across different areas. So that's kind of some of the idea of how we can enhance the outcomes of conservation, or actually enhance the effectiveness for conservation practices. So with that support, we organized several workshops. So like it's mostly based on two workshops that bring together people from different areas, like including from the research institutions, from the non-government organizations, federal agencies, and also some of the kind of people with different expertise, like the system-based expertise. So try to see how we can actually propose, or we can actually find a research framework that can effectively bring together like the different areas, or try to cross this boundary. Then we can kind of make, or we can potentially like promote joint actions to that can more effectively address some of the issues centered around the conservation, development, as well as the health. And also part of the other line of activity that has been going on together with this a few kind of workshops is this initiatives by the Nature Conservancy. Is called a bridge. So it's essentially trying to enrich or to actually to see how this kind of framework can be actually used, or can be taken by people from different sectors. But for that project, they basically, I think they had several hundred people or expertise worldwide coming together to formulate a rather large discussion or workshop. And I think they had a publication coming out last year. And that's the way that you can act to see how this might be actually used in your kind of situation with people coming from different sectors.
So that's fascinating. So it's in a sense the Nature Conservancy organizing, workshops and opportunities for people to get together and generate publications, best practices for those who are doing the actual management. That's particularly interesting to me because I often find that we'll talk about things and I'm kind of wondering how that gets implemented, in the real world, and how that information is filtered up or through or to those who are making policy and management decisions. So that's kind of how it works.
Yeah. So one of the things kind of we made it pretty clear in the paper is that kind of in order to make this kind of research framework feasible or workable in a real kind of setting is never going to be a top-down process. So kind of to make it kind of more effectively, it's inherently a co-development process with different stakeholder groups or people coming from totally different background. So, like for example, kind of in the so within the paper, we outline a different stages or kind of a roadmap. You can create the evidence-based causal chains. I think at several critical points along this roadmap, kind of we specifically highlighted where this with kind of this open conversation or the discussion with different kind of stakeholders are very critical. For example, like when or how this shared vision can be established, and also what kind of like the different the objectives or the community wants to achieve. So kind of that has to be a very strong kind of stakeholder engagement or participation, as well as kind of the whole process of actually developing the causal chains. Like for example, like kind of the workshop that we did as part of this work is actually sort of a minimum or the small scope in terms of how to develop this causal chains. Is basically having people spanning across different areas of expertise, but also people belonging to different stakeholder groups. Yeah, so that's kind of the process that we are envisioning. It's kind of co-produce knowledge with different stakeholder groups.
And that makes sense that you'd have to take that sort of horizontally based approach rather than a vertical one, because if you were purely going top down, you wouldn't incorporate all of the disparate groups that are, necessary parts of this sort of framework.
Yeah, or even the subsequent kind of the implementation or the evaluation. Like, if that's a vertical kind of strategy, like there would be no kind of support or buy-in from the different communities or stakeholder groups.
Now, and what sort of after-action monitoring are you envisioning? Because I would imagine that if you carry out an action that you expect to then have multiple effects on multiple systems, you then have to evaluate it and figure out, is it working as you expected and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So kind of in trying to construct this evidence-based causal chain, there will be two things that can be part of the monitoring. So like some of the causal links might be supported based on the evidence from the literature, from the previous studies, or from the expert knowledge. So for those kind of like a sort of more kind of the causal pathways where people have more confidence, like this kind of monitoring can actually be a way to verify whether this is true in this management setting. So that's kind of one case. The other case is that a lot of times when trying to build this kind of causal chains, there might be actually some of the linkages from the management actions to the outcomes might be very interesting, but there's no or very little information on what's the directions of the outcome, or what's the magnitude of change, and how much that can be confounded by other factors. So for this kind of situation, the kind of monitoring will be a more way to actually to figure out what's the actual consequences from or what's the nature of the causal pathways.
That's fascinating. So I'm wondering, and I think we've talked a little bit about this already, but it's a question I always ask, so I'll ask it here. What's next for this research, and what's next for this approach? It seems like it's being moved to larger and larger get-togethers, workshops, and being examined in more detail. Is there a plan to roll it out? Will this be used on Nature Conservancy administered lands?
Yeah. So something that I can talk, which is something I'm aware of, is that there's another that's currently in review right now. So that's the one that's kind of more focused on the evidence component. So in this paper, kind of like in this BioScience paper, like we talk mostly on the research framework, kind of the more focused on the causal chain component, but the evidence is somewhat somewhat very critical, but has not been fully addressed in this kind of paper. So there's another sort of sister or related paper which originated from a different workshop. So that's solely focused on the evidence, like to ask questions like what constitutes the evidence, what kind of evidence can be used, and also how we can how to address issues like the uncertainty, so the consistency or the applicability of different evidence, and also how we can consolidate kind of the evidence with different nature, like ranging from qualitative from quantitative, because a lot of the social studies, like they have very qualitative the evidence, but being qualitative evidence is not really as a lot of kind of natural scientists kind of may have different perspectives on kind of the strengths of evidence. So that's another very, very important component, which is actually how we can treat or we can weight the evidence coming from totally different background or actually different areas. Yeah, so that will provide a lot of information, is actually kind of towards more the implementation side. So kind of how we can produce something that's more robust, supported by the existing knowledge. But something that I can just from talking and personal conversations is that because the Nature Conservancy, they are doing a lot of the actual on the ground management or the conservation practices. So this might be a framework that can be used in the real setting by, for example, like managing the rangeland or managing some of the forest, which is part of the area that the TNC they are managing right now.
That's great, and we'll certainly look forward to that article coming out. Dr. Qiu, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And that concludes this episode of BioScience Talks. Just a reminder, the journal BioScience is published by Oxford University Press on behalf of the American Institute of Biological Sciences and is made possible by the support of our members and donors. Thank you, and talk to you next time.